everyone? Welcome back to the Shot Clock Podcast. Today I have on Rob Parker from Fox Sports. Rob, man, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm glad to have you on. I will talk a little bit about you recently released 2 new books. If I'm Writing, I'm Ripping, Tales of Rob Parker's Urinating Mouse. So tell us a little bit about those books.
Okay. If I'm writing, I'm ripping is like a collection of columns that I've written over the years. And it is basically columns where I rip people or, expose different things. It's a good read, a lot of different personalities and LeBron and Tom Brady and, things like that. The other book came from, it's a collection of tweets called Tales of Rob Parker's Urinating Mouse. And after big games, if you follow me on Twitter, it's usually, I'll say say if the Steelers lost a big game or something, or I'd say like, it's so quiet in Pittsburgh now, you can hear a mouse urinate on an empty Heinz ketchup bottle or something like that. So it became like a popular thing. So I collected all about 50 or so tweets, added some illustrations, not from me, from an illustrator, and put the book out. You could get either one at Amazon.com, but they're both fun reads.
With the Urinating Mouse, I want to talk about what's one of your favorite tweets that you got out of that book?
There's a few. There's one about urinating on a dusty Super Bowl trophy in Jerry Jones's office, because it's been so long since the Cowboys have won a championship. Another one, maybe the mouse urinating on a piece of Little Caesars pizza in Detroit, with Smokey Robinson playing in the background on the radio, stuff like that. So they're pretty fun.
A little bit more about the If I'm Writing, I'm Ripping. You mentioned kind of talking about guys like LeBron, Brady, and all them. So I want to talk a little bit about what, if you had to say right now compared to their past seasons, like Brady going to the Buccaneers, LeBron, how he's played this season, how would you rip them in this book?
Well, I mean, I don't know if I can rip LeBron this year. I mean, he played really well, and the Lakers were, before the season got derailed by this pandemic, we're rolling, and they had the best record in the West, so they were in good shape. As far as Brady, we saw the way that his career ended with the pick 6 in the playoff game against the Titans, and just where Brady is at age 43. I mean, I know everybody thinks they're going to the Super Bowl, even though the Bucs haven't made the playoffs in 12 years. All of a sudden, they're a Super Bowl contender. I think it's all premature. I think it's all extra hype. I'm not so sure where Tom Brady is. If you go and be honest and look at the numbers between him and Jameis Winston, they aren't that far apart. The difference was Winston threw a lot more interceptions. But as far as numbers and percentage of completion percentage and whatnot, the numbers are very, very close. So I'm not so sure. At age 43 and with talked into Gronk coming back, I'm just not so sure that's going to put them over the top, especially with New Orleans and Atlanta in their division.
I would talk a little bit about what was different about writing this book compared to writing like a normal article for a newspaper or anything you else have done.
Yeah, see, all of these are like a compilation of columns that I've already written, so it wasn't like you're sitting down writing a book from scratch. But just writing columns. I'm a columnist for Deadspin.com, and I write a weekly column there on the site. And I still enjoy writing. When people ask me, I write and I do radio and do television. And when people ask me, what do I do for a living, I always say I'm a sports writer, because that was my foundation. That's how I started in the newspaper business, and then I branched out into the other mediums. So writing is near and dear to my heart. I always consider myself a writer. I love writing columns, and I hope to write columns for the rest of my career.
Since it's so near and dear to your heart, what was one of your first experiences with writing, no matter it be back in high school or whatever?
That's a good question. You know what? I got into writing because my second grade teacher, I grew up in New York. I went to school called PS 50. And there was a teacher there. She was a young teacher named Miss Noble. And I was in second grade. So that makes me I was 7 years old. And I'll never forget the day she called me, pulled me aside from the rest of the class. And she looked straight into my eyes and she said, "Robert, you're an excellent writer. And when you grow up, you should be a writer." Can you imagine a second grade teacher identifying me as a writer? That I still can't believe that she thought I was a great writer at 7 years old. So that stuck with me. And then it was like, I wanted to grow up and be a baseball player. That was my dream. I wanted to play first base for the Mets. I grew up in Queens. I was a big Mets fan when I was a kid. And then when I realized I wasn't going to be that good or good enough to play at that level, I said, well, what could I do to still stick around sports and be involved? And I used to read 3 newspapers a day when I was a kid, 9 and 10 years old. So that was it. I was like, well, my backup plan, if I don't make it as a baseball player, I could be a sports writer. And I still would be able to go to the games, be around it. And that's really how this whole idea of me being a sports writer came about. You know, no one in my family's in the business. Nobody has a radio show. No one's ever written for a paper. No one's ever been on television. This was all came from an idea that I had in my head.
Are you and your second grade teacher, have you guys talked since that year happened?
No, I've never seen her again. I wish I could find her. You know, there have been other teachers in my life who've also impacted me. Joanne Lee was a professor at Columbia. I have my master's degree in journalism from Columbia, J School, great experience. And at the time when I was going to J School, I was 24, and I was already a staff writer for the Daily News in New York. I was covering the NBA back then. I covered the Nets and then the Knicks. And she pulled me into her office, another one where I got pulled into an office. And she said, "You know what? I just need more from you." She said, "You're more advanced than your classmates. A lot of them are just learning on how to be reporters or whatever. And you're working at a major metropolitan daily as a sports writer already. You can't be on their level, what they're doing and what they're learning. You have to do more." She came up to me. She was a small woman. I'm 6'4". She came up behind me. She pretended like she had a knife in her hand. She stuck it in my back and she said, I'll never forget these words. She said, "I want you to stick the knife in, turn it, and draw blood. That's what I want you to do. I need more from you." And that's lived with me my entire career. I'm always trying to go for the jugular. I'm always trying to dig deeper for the different story or a more in-depth story. I hate to just follow the crowd. So many guys it's called, pack journalism. Everybody does the same story. It's easy, right? I never wanted to be that guy. And Joanne Lee had a big part to do with that.
You mentioned before this that baseball's like a big part of your life. So
Baseball is my number one. Of all the sports, I love baseball the most.
So what stands out to you about baseball compared to many others?
Baseball there's a fabric to the game. A lot of basketball and football games, they all blend together. Like baseball is like a soap opera, continuing story, night after night after night. If you ever watch a playoff game and the way you view a playoff game, every pitch is important. You watch the game like you have to watch every pitch. It's just to me, it has more fabric, more texture. Run-of-the-mill NBA games. I mean, I love the NBA. I love basketball. I love the football. But if I could tune into an NBA game in the fourth quarter or the last 4 minutes. Most of the other game is nondescript. It's not always like that in baseball. It's not always the ninth inning. It could be a big inning. It could be positioning the infielders. It could be pitch selection. Do you know what I mean? Like there's just so much more going on, a thinking man's game, and it has more to it. So I just always, growing up in New York, New York's a baseball town, you know, Mets and Yankees, and all my friends I grew up with, we played baseball. That's all we ever did. And it's near and dear to my heart. I have a baseball podcast that drops every Thursday today on the Herd Podcast Network. It's called Inside the Parker. And it's a cool podcast. It's all baseball. 22 minutes is all it is. And it gives you like the take of all the hot topics and stories in baseball for the previous week.
So you covered the Cincinnati Reds in your time before making it out to Fox Sports. So what was kind of different about covering baseball compared to just being able to play the game?
It was great. And covered in Cincinnati. I'm not sure if you know, but Cincinnati the Reds were the first professional team in the United States. The Redlegs, Cincinnati Redlegs. And to go there, baseball is Cincinnati's a huge baseball town. Opening day is like a holiday. I mean, I was thrilled to be able to cover that team and to be a part of it. I was there right after they won the World Series in 1990, and they had just a cast of characters. Lou Piniella was the manager. Marge Schott was the crazy owner, controversial owner. They had Rob Dibble, Eric Davis, Chris Sabo, Hal Morris, Barry Larkin, a Hall of Famer. Just a great bunch of guys. I got to work alongside Hal McCoy, who's a Hall of Fame baseball writer from the Dayton Daily News. Jerry Krasnick, who worked a long time at ESPN, was the beat writer for the Cincinnati Post. I was the first black sports writer who ever covered the Cincinnati Reds. I worked at the Cincinnati Enquirer. It was a glorious time, and I enjoyed it. I was only there for 2 years because I wound up going to Detroit to be a columnist, but I loved every minute of it. I could have done it for a lot longer. It was just fun.
You mentioned being the first black sports writer for the Reds. So in your career, you've always been kind of a pioneer. What was one of your first times that you kind of felt like, I'm pioneering the sports writing industry?
It was well, that was one in 1991, but the big one was the next one in 1993 when I became the first black sports columnist at the Detroit Free Press. The Free Press is a great paper. When they hired me, the paper was 161 years old. So they had never had a black guy who had his own sports column in the paper, which was incredible to me. And I thought it was an honor to go there and be the voice of the fans, of the people of Detroit. They adopted me like I was, from there, and I wound up spending, more than 20 years there total at in Detroit. I only was a columnist there for 2 years at the Free Press, and then I went back to New York and then came back to Detroit, and then I was a sports columnist for the Detroit News for 9 years. So I was a columnist for a long time in that town, and I loved every minute of it. Detroit is a great sports town, and being the first black sports columnist at the Detroit Free Press is something I'm proud of.
Have you ever had anyone that's came up to you directly and told you that you've influenced their life by those pioneering moments?
Yeah, I belong to the National Association of Black Journalists. I've mentored a number of people in the business, and yeah, I've had people say, that they admire what I've done, how I paved the way for other people to come behind me, and it's flattering and it's nice. So I appreciate those things, but I didn't set out to do it, but I definitely set out to achieve my goals and wasn't going to let anybody stop me.
So before we end the interview, I want to kind of go on with today. How has the whole pandemic affected your job right now?
Yeah, it's, halted. I can't, obviously, there's no studio where I'm going to be on the Herd today at 1:40 Eastern. I'll do that from here, just like I'm talking to you from my kitchen. Chris Broussard and I have our radio show on Fox Sports Radio. It's called The Odd Couple. 7 to 10 p.m. Eastern on Fox Sports Radio. And I do that from my apartment as well. Chris is in New Jersey at his house. So it's kind of weird not being in the studio together doing a radio show, but that's what we're doing. So it's a little different, but you have to work around it. There's still plenty of stuff to talk about, and you got to be creative during this time.
So before I let you go, I just want to thank you for coming on the interview. It really meant a lot. I really appreciate you're one of my favorite analysts out there. So I appreciate that.
And good luck to you in your career, and you're off to a good start. And I just say my advice to you or anybody else listening or watching is basically, you have to want it more than the other guys. A very competitive business. A lot of people want to do it. If you're willing to put in the work and the energy and want to be, you got to stand out. You got to be different to get noticed. So that's my advice. Work hard, try to be creative, make it fun, and make it informative.
We'll have to have you on again another time, maybe discuss a little bit about when the season returns. It'd be nice to have you on. But again, thank you for coming on. And if you want to listen to Shot Clock Podcast, check it out on Apple, Spotify, even Anchor FM. Be sure to help us out and download the podcast, and go check out Rob Parker's podcast as well. Again, thank you, Rob. And that's all we have this time on the Shot Clock Podcast.